In fact, 3/4 of Iran's imports pass through ports in Dubai. The financial ties are significant here. According to the Tehran Times, the Iran-Dubai trade levels stood at $12 billion, out of which Iranian exports constituted $2 billion just last year. So now, as a result of Abu Dhabi's bailout of Dubai and the debt crisis, there are new questions swirling about whether Dubai and Iran's financial ties may be severed. For insight into just what this may mean and how it ties back to U.S. policy, we're joined by Reva Bhalla. She's Stratfor's Director of Analysis. She's live in Austin, Texas. Quick reaction, if you would give me one, to news today that Credit Suisse has been accused of funneling Iranian money, helping it to go through U.S. financial institutions.
Yeah, this is one of many ways that Iran has used to try to get around any sort of sanctions regime that the United States is trying to implement. And right now, as the United States is nearing this December deadline to get Iran to come to the negotiations, which isn't likely to happen, we're going to start to see the sanctions talk really gear up. So companies like Credit Suisse, but also the Swiss companies like Vitol, Glencore, Trafigura, all these companies that are supplying Iran with gasoline, insurance companies like Lloyd's, all of these names are going to start to come out into the open a lot more now as the U.S. starts targeting firms that continue to help the Iranian economy.
So there's been much talk about further U.S. sanctions on Iran. Has that focus been misplaced? In other words, this action that's been happening sort of behind the scenes, or this latest case with Credit Suisse that originated right here in New York with DA Robert Morgenthau, are some of these other methods of cracking down on Iranian money going to be the next front in this?
Yes, exactly. And the idea is that the United States wants to point out that many of these companies are dealing in things like the gasoline trade with Iran. And the United States has designated the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as a terrorist entity. And so if the United States can go to these firms quietly and say, look, I know that you're dealing with Iran, and those dealings are actually funding the IRGC, a terrorist entity, then your assets could become vulnerable, and that reputation could become a huge risk for these companies. So a lot of firms now are just waiting and watching to see just how serious the United States gets in the weeks ahead as the sanctions deadline is looming ahead at the end of December.
Our viewers right now are looking at video there of missile testing by Iran. That's relevant because today UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, had said, or excuse me, Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister, said that Iran may face, in fact, harsher sanctions due to the fact that they went through with that testing. That's really the origin of these concerns about Iran's financial ties. As it relates back to Dubai, your firm has said that one offshoot of the debt crisis may actually be Washington putting further pressure on the UAE to sever those substantial trade ties.
Yes, and sever is a strong word, and it's always been very difficult to patch up this huge hole in any sort of sanctions regime against Iran because of the UAE. And in looking at the UAE, there are a few things to keep in mind in understanding how it works. First, there's a huge rivalry between Dubai and Abu Dhabi and the two families that rule those emirates. Two, the economies are very different. Abu Dhabi, primarily oil-based, Dubai, tourism, financial services, real estate. And three, that they're very politically and economically autonomous by design. Dubai has long resisted coming under Abu Dhabi's political authority. And to give you an example of that, Dubai contributes only about 3% to the Emirati $12 billion budget, whereas Abu Dhabi contributes 90%. And then the fourth point is very, very important for the United States because the two emirates have very different foreign policy orientations. Dubai has been much more oriented toward Iran. That's because Dubai is the main transshipment point for Iran to trade with much of the outside world. Abu Dhabi, on the other hand, is much more in line with Saudi Arabia in taking a much firmer line against the Iranians. So in this current context, as Abu Dhabi is bailing out Dubai, the assumption is that political conditions are going to be attached to those bailouts. And that's why we really want to take a close look at which assets Abu Dhabi is going to go after in Dubai. Think about Abu Dhabi seizing assets in ports, in the customs systems. Things like that could give the United States a lot of leverage in trying to patch up that sanctions regime and trying to put pressure on Iran.
Now, whenever talk of sanctions surfaces or, further crackdowns, it raises the question of unintended consequences here. What is it that we should be potentially concerned about as an offshoot of this crackdown? Because money is fungible. It's going to find a home somewhere, even if it is pushed out of the UAE.
Of course. And, the other big factor is Russia. There are a lot of political negotiations taking place right now between Russia and the United States. And even if you tried a gasoline sanctions regime against Iran, if you don't have Russia's cooperation, if you don't have China's cooperation, there are still huge, huge holes in that pressure campaign. And so when we actually look at this moving forward, Israel is the one who has to decide whether the sanctions regime is going to work or not.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll continue to follow this story. Reva Bhalla, Director of Analysis at Stratfor.